Hello everyone. I know this isn't the usual kind of video I make, and if that's irritating to you, I apologize. Things will return to normal shortly for reasons I will make clear. It's a little rambly, it's not a thorough review. Regardless, I hope you enjoy it. However, I do feel like I need to warn you that there will be spoilers for Nine Souls, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, Hollow Knight, Metroid Prime, Silksong, and Control. Anyway, back to the irregularly scheduled video. But I'll say in advance, for however long you stick around for this one, thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome to 2026. We're a few months in now, and I hope it's been treating you tolerably, or better. Not to worry, I'm sure nothing bad will happen. Now, I imagine, like most reasonable people, you're desperately wondering from what foul circumstance such a wretchedly atypical video arose. So in the interest of transparency, I had been planning to review Call of the Night, but then my City review got copystrike, and in the subsequent scramble for a follow-up idea that wasn't an anime review for safety's sake, someone in the Patreon Discord suggested I cover Silksong. I can't imagine anyone would want to see my take on Silksong, I thought to myself. Game's zeitgeist is past it, and what else is there to say that hasn't already been said? It would be the act of a fool to strike after the iron had cooled so precipitously. So anyway, here's a series of smaller takes regarding every Metroidvania that I played in 2025. Didn't have to be released that year, just one that I finished. Because if you're going to strike the iron regardless of its temperature, you may as well smash it. Just in case anyone watching isn't aware, and forgive me for the potential patronization, Metroidvania, some call them search action, but I'll be using the term Metroidvania to annoy people, is a genre of often 2D games inspired by Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, being a combination of action platformer and RPG, featuring an open-ended branching map with various specific zones and upgrades that allow further progression in those zones. Often you will see a nice item and have to sit there and wonder why you can't get ye flask. Goodness, that sounds fun, doesn't it? Oftentimes there will be a big map. You can some of the times put a pin down on said map to remind you where the go really fast boots are, and that they're behind a schwangle door that you'll need to find the bioflip discombobulator to unlock. Basically, it's cool stuff behind funny doors that require silly keys, the subgenre. A terrific fun. Anyway, with that ostensibly cleared up, we hit January like it owes us money, and with it I was hit in return by Nine Souls, also known as Sekiro Furries Die Twice, was the first quote-unquote proper 2D Metroidvania I played last year, and it was a hell of a way to start. Little background, like most freaks, I adore Sekiro. For me, as a filthy Dex enjoyer, it's one of the best of From's oeuvre from a gameplay perspective. I'd previously been leery of the Souls-like moniker in the past when applied to 2D games like this. Salt and Sanctuary is one I bounced off of, for example. Unlike that, Nine Souls is inspired by Sekiro in the same way that streaking nude across the pitch is inspired by The Birth of Venus. Same broad strokes, very different execution. Which is really just to say it's a parry-heavy game where damage is essentially cached until you deal it all at once with a special attack. Death blows in Sekiro's case, talisman attacks in Nine Souls, and in both cases it feels unbelievably satisfying to VoIP an enemy's nearly full health bar to nothing in one fell swoop if, after a series of decidedly less fell swoops, it's extraordinarily sharp to control in general, and the addition of verticality makes up for the 2D plane on which the game takes place. Bouncing through the air, parrying attacks, and then dashing through an enemy to blow them up felt satisfying every time I did it. Real you're already dead energy with how they pause and shake a little before popping, like they're a bottle of champagne. Except, they're not a bottle of champagne, are they? They're a man who died. He may have had children. It's very sad. Unique about Nine Souls is its touted Taopunk setting. Chinese cyberpunk, I guess, is the more straightforward way of saying it. Not that what that really means is initially particularly clear. Another thing it borrows heavily from the Souls series is its extraordinarily restrained storytelling, leaving most of it in the background, even if a lot of it does resolve in a more obvious way as it goes. And trust me, I hear the revolver cylinder click every time I invoke a comparison to From's body of work. All we know from the start is that humans are enslaved by anthropomorphic animal aliens, we're in some sort of human brain farming facility, and there's a nasty dose of the flesh-melting variety going around that's killed most everyone else. It's like if Planet of the Apes met being alive on the planet Earth in the year 2020. It's a remarkably unsettling setting, if a bit humdrum visually. For its alleged Towpunk inspirations, it's very muted, very dull. There's more contrast in Steamboat Willie than there is in most of the zones. It works for the setting and the tone, but it does make for a rather uninteresting journey a lot of the time, and there is, by its nature as a Metroidvania, a lot of running around places you've already been. And quite slowly at that. A lot of it feels either straight Tau or straight punk. There's only one zone I can think of that feels like it properly combines the two, which is the one you're currently seeing, in case that wasn't clear. It was a sobering, trying, brutal experience. So of course it was perfect for January. The story is extremely bleak when it's not grotesque, and often it's both. In parts, it somewhat reminds me of 2017's Prey reboot. Being terrifically fun to play and also by turns sickening and disturbing is a tricky tightrope to walk, but it's managed here with a relative ease I haven't seen since the original Toy Story. I'll never get that baby-headed spider robot out of my head, Jesus Christ. There is, I think, a profound sense of unease involved in playing as a character who is a major involved party in the enslaving and farming of the human race, who does genuinely seem to view them as unintelligent cattle despite all the evidence to the contrary, whilst destroying the other perpetrators who have all seemingly just given up and hedonistically passed the time whilst awaiting a slow and painful death. Like this one guy who's getting a handy J whilst in a K-hole at the club. At least it seems like he's enjoying it, I guess. We should all be so lucky. The extraterrestrial furries turned humans into livestock for some elaborate selfish plan, and then when the plan seemed to fail, they just gave up even whilst the human farming machinery yet ticks on. I'm sure there aren't any parallels we could draw from this, so it's good that I'm not going to try. The final boss has 3 phases, the third beat me bloody. Really satisfying, I can't beat this guy, to I did it, oh god they have a second phase progression here. Excellent Soulsy experience, pretty competent Metroidvania overall. Prince of Persia has long been a beloved childhood series of mine, starting with the wonderful Sands of Time, the remake of which I'm sure nothing bad has happened to, and which will be done any day now. This may date me rather too accurately, but I was too young and naive to understand why the tone went weird in Warrior Within, and the Dahaka scared me to the point where I only played it through once. Didn't even get the water sword, so it's fair to call me a fake fan. I did, however, somewhat damningly, genuinely really love the Two Thrones. 50-50% chance every time I pick up a kitchen knife I say, why is it whenever disaster strikes I find myself without a proper blade? So it's safe to say that I do have a lot of fond memories of the franchise. Memories so invasive, in fact, the kitchen knife isn't the only recurring voice line I hear in my day-to-day. It's long since reached the point where now I can't hear the word pomegranate without subsequently hearing Yuri Lowenthal saying, "They're messy and impossible to eat with dignity," in my head, so if nothing else the pomegranate smear campaign worked. It's true, they are messy. Writing in games used to be so much better than it is now, eh? Speaking of biting observational comedy, Ubisoft is currently burning down before our very eyes. As a result, it doesn't seem like The Lost Crown is going to see a sequel anytime soon, in the same way that following the Chicxulub impact, that's hard to say, dinosaurs started to go out of fashion, which makes it all the more depressing that The Lost Crown is really pretty bloody good. Oh my god, wait, the Sands of Time remake! I've heard some people complain that you don't play as the Prince of Persia in this one. I imagine they're the same people who complain that you don't play as Zelda in The Legend of Zelda, or a Halo in Halo. You know, tangenting a little bit here, it struck me that calling Samus Metroid is technically not inaccurate. Sorry, we're getting off topic, Jesus. The Metroidvania mania set in, we're only on game 2. So, The Lost Crown. It's good. You know, I realize now pretty early on into this video that reviewing several different games cast from a very similar mold is going to really stretch my capacity for synonyms, so I think starting here, I'll more discuss what each one does uniquely rather than quantify how good the trappings of the style are on a game-by-game basis, but also, this does them well, so there's that. As I said before, in this one we're not playing as the titular prince, but are instead trying to save him as his friend/bodyguard Sargon, which reminds me of Arknight, so it gets a few points there. The series hadn't shied away from it before, but this installation really throws into that magic of the Sahara aspect of Arabian myth that I've always adored about the series, even more so than Sands of Time did, which is why I consistently refer to the protagonist as Sheikh Zanzibar before finally internalizing his name.
Sheikh Zanzibar!
The setting is essentially a ram of of the pillars, and that certainly does get my British blood going, my hands almost unconsciously reaching for a quill to write the king and ask for permission to rob people. The series' main calling card is, I would say, either the ability to rewind time or the ability to call women in metal bikinis rude names, but rarely did the former manifest in much more than a free retry in the event of a mistake, and the latter never materialized at all, because unlike Warrior Within, Lost Crown wasn't written by a 13-year-old. Here, the concept of manipulating time has been turned into the main fount for most of the traversal and puzzle-solving abilities that Sargon can unlock, which cleverly factor into combat as well, even if I suck at using them. In a way, the Prince of Persia series going Metroidvania makes total sense. The lack of that framing device that this is a story the prince is telling after the fact does mean, tragically, that after you screw up you don't get to hear the prince hastily correct himself after mistakenly relating the part of the story where he slipped off of a ledge and was impaled on a dozen spikes leading to his death, however. So that's sad. I quite like how they cast off series traditions like the Dagger of Time and the generic time rewinding potion in favor of more unique, interesting abilities. More interesting than the abilities, though, are the environments you go through. There's one absolutely phenomenal part of the game where you're navigating a sea that's been frozen in time mid-battle that's just stunning to run through. It's like that one scene from The Prince of Egypt with the big whale silhouette that gave me chills as a child, but an entire sequence of a video game. And also there are no whale silhouettes, so really it's not much like The Prince of Egypt at all. Even the less impressive environments are still interesting. A magical library, a city somehow impossibly perched miles above the ground, surrounded by the wings of a tremendous stone eagle god, the nexus of time and space itself. It's all really excellent stuff. If you're going to be backtracking a lot, and this is a Metroidvania, so you are, it helps if the areas are memorable and visually interesting, certainly. That excellent environmental design is also further buoyed by the narrative itself, which is also shockingly engaging for what it is, throwing as it does into the complexities of time travel. Someone getting revenge on you for something you're going to do but have not yet done, you trying to solve the murder of someone who's still alive, all really interesting concepts. Rarely do I care about the story of Metroidvanias, and I would struggle to say they were ever narrative powerhouses in the first place. Hell, Super Metroid's story is essentially, there is a Metroid, Ridley stole it, Mother Brain is also there, you can shoot all three. But this one actually does a relatively good job of keeping it interesting from beat to beat. Gets a little invasive sometimes, perhaps, but hey, so does open heart surgery. But it could save your life. Will Lost Crown save your life? No, it's a phenomenal game, it really is. The fact Ubisoft sent it out to die with next to no marketing when the very next year Silksong would crash every digital storefront on the day of its release shows that Metroidvanias are still perfectly viable, and it really also does showcase the short-sightedness of one of the world's biggest game publishers. And they still haven't made another Rayman game yet, the bastards. Yes, I am still keeping track. No, the shitty re-release of Rayman 1 doesn't count. No, not Silksong, the original. I had played it before, of course, back shortly after it launched. I never got around to actually finishing it until the release of Silksong was confirmed, at which point I played, one could realistically argue, too much Hollow Knight, resulting in me actually needing to take a break from its sequel lest I get too fatigued with the franchise and end up not enjoying it, which, I'm sure we can all agree, would be a terrible fate after a wait as long as this. For other people, I only finished Hollow Knight in 25. So, what is there to say about Hollow Knight that hasn't already been said? Well, a tremendous amount owing to the versatility of the English language, like perhaps one might say, Hollow Knight has, for many a Metroidvania, and for both influences, increasing yearly. As fun as it is unpassable. But it is a very well designed game, that much is true, partly owing to its influence. As I've said before, I've bounced off of 2D Souls-likes before, as with Salt and Sanctuary, but I seem to recall feeling familiar fatigue back in 2017 when I first bounced off of it that July. But it's as popular as it is for a reason, or several rather, and one of those is probably that it is very much its own thing. I don't want to dwell over much on this one, but suffice it to say it's very fun and engaging and atmospheric, all the buzzwords you love to hear and I love to say. I do feel like this was the moment where I hit my personal limit for the whole nearly every NPC quest chain ends with the character in question dying or going insane, then dying beat that almost every FromSoft and FromSoft-inspired game seems like it must have by default. So when the time came for the big lug blacksmith to tell me his life had lost all meaning now that he had forged the ultimate nail and asked me to kill him, I said, sure, and deep sixed the guy instantly without a shred of consternation, only to later find out he can fall in love and get married. C'est la vie, I suppose. Shouldn't have asked me to kill him, huh? Some people might call it jumping the gun, but I call it funny. So I guess it's fair to say I didn't really buy into the emotional through line of the narrative, but again, we're in Metroidvania town. The stories in these games are never front and center, but I suppose it's fair to say that I didn't feel especially compelled to figure out the inner workings of the Hallow Nest on a lore front. For me, it was more of a series of environments to jump through, and thankfully for the most part the story is kept very intentionally vague, so it never got in the way. On a gameplay front though, it's as smooth as anything. I've always been very partial to the DuckTales/Shovel Knight-esque pogoing style of gameplay, and Hollow Knight has that in spades. There's something immensely satisfying about popping yourself above a big bastard of a bug and timing your slashes so you plink up with just enough height to keep the loop going, whilst your victim lies helplessly beneath you, the developers cruelly neglecting to give them any sort of overhead slash with which to defend themselves. It is a little overpowered though. If Team Cherry ever made a sequel, were I on the team, I might suggest they have the initial bounce be diagonal, so pogoing isn't as viable from the very start without a substantial increase in the skill floor required to do so. But that's just me. In general, I didn't find it particularly difficult. Most bosses I cleared on the first try, with only a few optional ones giving me any substantial trouble. Even the final boss wasn't very difficult for me. Maybe I'm that good. Or maybe I'm just in my element when it's time to pogo a go-go. I do feel like I'm in the minority when I say the game's visuals never took my breath away. It is very pretty, especially in the more interesting areas like Green Path, and for such a small team, it's staggering the scale of what they accomplished. But to be clear, with a few exceptions, it's a lot of blue-grey caves you're going through here. And if you don't like ammonite fossils, there are approximately however many other games exist you should play instead, let me tell you. I wish I loved anything as much as Team Cherry loves ammonite fossils. But again, I can't give this one as fair of a shake as I have done the others here. I'd experienced at least half of this one once already, so as far as the joy of discovery goes, that was diminished quite heavily in this playthrough, and that's kind of crucial to the whole kit and caboodle. You can never go home again, even if home is a big nasty hole full of bugs that ask you to kill them. Still, a phenomenal game. I hope the sequel's good. Yes, it's true. I haven't played Metroid Prime. Or, well, I hadn't, until 2025. My first Nintendo home console was the Wii. I was always a Sony kid growing up. No certified classics for me, thanks. I'm over here playing fucking Sandvane. And very much like Sandvane, Metroid Prime is, by all accounts, one of the greatest games of all time. Cue the footage of the GameSpot review guy saying it's like Citizen Kane. Jeff Gersman on his little Tony Hawk skateboard going across the sky. I miss Giant Bomb. So that's a high bar. A lot of franchises really struggled with going into the third dimension in the fifth console generation, that most transitory of generations, and Metroid, a latecomer, walks in the sixth and shows everyone just how you do it so well in the subgenre that now bears its name, despite its incredibly troubled development. It's a nice narrative. But like the person who played Twilight Princess before Ocarina of Time and preferred the former, the identity of whom shall forever remain unknown, does it hold up? Is it still, as the experts say, B's good? Well, the first stumbling block to my attempting to answer that question was discovering that Metroid Prime decided not to show up to class on first-person shooter control scheme day, and instead cribbed its homework from Resident Evil and Ocarina of Time, which was a very silly mistake to make considering neither are first-person shooters. It's got tank controls and Z targeting. Bloody tank controls in Metroid Prime. I don't know how I missed that memo. Imagine my surprise hearing the game's the single greatest gift to humanity, and then to load in and discover that to control Samus you need to be forklift certified. Which of course I am. All aiming is done with a lock-on, unless you lock yourself down and aim while being unable to move. It's a control scheme emblematic of a time before Halo had a chance to really cement what we now consider as the twin-stick standard, even if Prime did come out afterwards. Trigger to shoot? Nah. A button. Right stick to look around? Nah, weapon select. Maniacs over there at Retro Studios. Even more surprising than the control scheme itself, though, is the fact that after just a few hours of play, the unique challenges of that control scheme turned Metroid Prime into a wonderfully textured experience that somehow felt very good to control, even if it would be considered clunky by today's standards, which, let me be clear, it is, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. As Confucius said, a clunk in hand is worth two in the bush, and very much like the esoteric wisdom of Confucius, the sense of progression is quite profound as well. Which which is good, since that's the whole point of a game like this. I like that they let you enter areas you can't properly navigate yet and leave it to you to discern that you're not supposed to be there, either from your own untimely demise or your suit blaring an alarm at you saying, "It's so hot, man," or from spending a real-life hour in the godforsaken underwater section without the armor that allows you to move freely underwater, which, to be clear, I didn't do, but even if I did, I definitely still wouldn't be bitter about it, but Prime is a 0 out of 10. Another thing that struck me is how small the map is, relatively speaking. We're in somewhat early 3D here still. The disc sizes aren't the biggest, especially on the GameCube, so Prime is, while certainly expansive, owing to the lack of a fast travel system, navigable in its entirety from one side of the map to the other in about 10 minutes. It's all very interlinked, and seeing the world web out as you progress through it and build familiarity with it is an immensely rewarding experience. Unlocking additional elevators in various zones and finding out all the ways they loop back around on the major hub-like area was continually thrilling. But don't worry, it's not like Dark Souls. Do you think they bought it? As a result, it was surprising that my final playtime wound up being just over 10 hours at 75% completion. I know, pathetic, but even still, that's a lot shorter than the other games on this. I guess we can call it a list. Nine Souls took me around 30, The Lost Crown took me about 25, a certain other game on this list that we'll get to later on, don't worry about it, took me almost 90 to 100% complete. I don't think its short length is a bad thing, though. It is, after all, what you do with it. I can only describe Prime as a very tight experience. Sorry about making two vaguely sexual references in as many sentences. I was advised to be hornier. So your tip for me in the year 2026 to try and accrue more views is to be hornier.
I think it's the only way.
The only way. Again, the game's sense of progression is fantastic. The final blaster upgrade that lets you chew through any enemy in 1 or 2 shots is almost as satisfying a power-up as the enhanced gravity gun from Half-Life 2, which is saying something. There's a real sense of mastery involved with Prime, so it's remarkable that it's such a short experience, relatively speaking. The way they ping your next major destination after a few minutes of aimless wandering helps keep the pace up, even if it does feel a little bit like the game's disappointed in you when it does so. Yes, we know you're lost, the game seems to say. Go here and try a little bit harder not to be so stupid next time. So I suppose the question of if it holds up is a moot point past a certain degree. I won't say I came away thinking it was the best game ever made or that it's like Citizen Kane, but I did have a very good time with it. Although if I ever have to fight another Chozo ghost again, I'm going to lose my mind. I would say it's a little surprising we don't see more 3D Metroidvanias, but well, I'll come back to that later. Show the frenzy bar from Bloodborne filling up. No, not the original. Silksong. A game whose launch crashed every digital storefront on which it retailed. A game that people were waiting for almost a decade, and a game that had a surprisingly mixed initial reception. Don't get me wrong, the impressions overall seemed to be very positive, but they brought with them a negativity that I wasn't expecting, mostly centered on the difficulty. It would be very elitist and gatekeepy of me to say that the game's slightly higher than average difficulty level was so frequently criticized because, having drawn such a tremendously large install base, the average player skill expression level was low, sort of like how you saw a huge amount of people complain that Sekiro was too hard when that game came out, so I won't. I also don't even know if that's true. According to Steam's achievement percentages, around 30% of people finished Silksong's third act in one way or another, whereas Hollow Knight's number is closer to 20 to 25. Almost 40% of people cleared Silksong's second act, so the numbers are definitely in Silksong's favor, at least on PC. So what gives? Is Silksong that much harder than Hollow Knight, or did the internet uncharacteristically overstate a game's difficulty? Were a few sour grapes so upset by it that their raised voices drowned out the quiet majority who had no problem with it? Why am I asking you these questions? Now, I don't want to dwell over long on what's certainly the most talked about aspect of Silksong. You've heard it, I've heard it, sing it with me, Last Judge Run Back, Bile, Water, Savage, Beast or Fly, but it does bear mentioning, since it did inform a lot of my early experience with it and how I came away from it in the end. Savage Beast Fly was the moment I said, oh no. The thing rocked me in a way I didn't think was fair. Sometimes the hitboxes would just line up in such a way that there was no way to escape incoming damage, and I thought to myself, this is bad design. And sure enough, there's an entire subreddit dedicated to hating this guy, and I would say for good reason. I do think he's bad. At the very least, he's not fun for me to fight. I don't think it's good game design. At the same time, I had gone in without some upgrades and any tools that would have worked. After giving up, I stumbled onto the little spike trap that you can throw out, and suddenly the whole thing was substantially easier, and I cleared it almost straight away. It turns out I'd just gone into the fight unprepared, quite similarly to how I'd entered the heat area in Metroid Prime. There is a question there, and it's a very good question of if it's fair to be caught unprepared in a game where you don't know what it means to be prepared. I had no way of knowing if the guy was optional or not. I didn't know what tools existed. I didn't know he'd have a near enough direct counter. So I bashed my head against him until I got so frustrated that I swallowed my pride and left to go and do something else, and I would struggle to call that a good experience, even recognizing it was largely a prison of my own design. It really wasn't a very exciting prison either. It would not be turned into a tourist attraction after its closing. Forgive me, but it reminded me of nothing so much as my first Elden Ring playthrough. I bashed my head against Margit for so bloody long, despite the fact that he's designed to not so subtly tell you that you should go somewhere else, find better gear, level up, etc. He's a litmus test, and an intentionally brutal first major boss encounter. He's meant to teach you that you can go and do other things, and that blindly following the critical path is not the goal. But walking away from him stung. It didn't feel good. It was admitting he was too tough for me. And going back and beating him at a higher level with upgraded equipment didn't feel good either. It felt like I had given up and cheated. Even though Elden Ring is an RPG, and the idea of leveling up to beat a boss is encouraged, and certainly isn't cheating. And this is where the conversation about the high difficulty of Silksong affected how I engaged with it. Was me being stubborn about wanting to beat a tough boss a personal flaw, or was that just what the game was expecting from me? In Prime, I knew the lava area required a special suit from my knowledge of the other games. For all I knew, thanks to people barking about how tough the game was, Beastfly wasn't a mid-game boss that expected me to have more equipment and masks than I did. It could have just as easily been a normal boss on the critical path. I didn't know what was behind him. Could have been a whole new zone. Could have been Princess Peach. Could have been Rayman. It is, of course, entirely possible to beat him without those upgrades, but, and I say this with a visceral sting like I'm Vegeta admitting Goku could kick my ass, it wasn't for me. I mean, it may have been if I was willing to spend an entire evening getting increasingly salty at getting cornered by bad RNG on his ad spawns, but it felt actively unfair, and I do agree with the people who think it's not a fun or well-considered fight, even if you do have the gear for it. And that is one of the risks of Metroidvanias, but it's also one of their strengths. You might very rightly argue that my unwillingness to go and explore in other areas meant that getting beaten up by Beastfly for a few hours was valid punishment for not meeting the game on its terms, and I do think there's a truth to that. It is, after all, a big part of what makes Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild so compelling. How easy it is to get into a situation you're not ready for is a consistent threat and adds texture to the world, like how not knowing if you're going to be knifed adds texture to a walk through old London town. One of the risks of not holding your hand is that you might walk off a cliff and die and explode because a big nasty bug shot 47 scythers at you. And maybe they go like, and that's a risk. But it's fun that there are risks. That's part of the game, and whilst I didn't enjoy Beastfly in the moment, and I still don't think it's a fun fight, I'm happy it's there. Could maybe use a splash less randomness though, and maybe it could do just one mask of damage on fucking contact, rather than the 2 it currently subtracts. Actually, it's a horrible fight, I hate it. It's bad and the game sucked. The last Judge boss run comparatively was, and I say this with all the arrogance of a king on his golden throne, easy. I've heard people talk about this thing like it's Satan incarnate, like it's the biggest failure of video game design ever conceived and a sure sign that the developers of Silksong were just trying to piss the player off. It takes about 40 seconds and it's extremely replicable. There are worse boss runs in most FromSoft games, so it does puzzle me why this one has been singled out when it really isn't that bad at all. I wouldn't say it even breaks the top 3 worst runbacks in the game. In fact, I found the satisfying little tink noise when you pogo off the big guy's shields and bells gave it almost a rhythmic flow state feeling. Look, I'll try and run it 3 times in a row without using any abilities other than the dash and the nail bounce. It really wasn't bad at all for me. Last Judge took quite a few tries too, and I really did enjoy that fight, but this is one I just didn't see the problem with. But what I think that goes to show is that one person's easy is another person's incredibly hard, and also that I'm really good at video games no matter what the footage is seeming to imply. And then of course there's bile water, which people universally hated so much, the Pope certified it as a biblical plague. It's funny, I said I wouldn't harp on the difficulty too much despite having spent 5 minutes on it now, so I'll get this part over quick. The fake bench is funny. The hidden bench is a little too hidden. The run back is ass even with the hidden bench. It's set up to feel like a slap in the face. Unlike that one Star Rail trailer, however, this one isn't hot. But it's worth noting that there's a charm to mitigate the maggot debuff. The secret bench cuts the run back down significantly, and you can always re-watch the Star Rail trailer if you want to watch Sparkle slap herself again. In a way, the problems people have with bile water are the same problems I have with Beastfly, maybe even less so. When I first saw how far back you were sent after dying to Grohl, I said, surely they can't expect you to do this every single time. And then a friend told me about the secret bench, and I said, aha, and then the run back. Well, it was still miserable, but not as miserable. There are tools to partially mitigate some of the things that make it awful, but how are you supposed to know they're out there? Did you read a guide? You're reading a guide right now, aren't you? Can't have that. Come on, put that down and join the rest of us in hell. I probably wouldn't have found the bench without my friend telling me about it. I only found the Wreath of Purity after beating Grohl, and even then, would it have been worth replacing one of my combat charms when the maggot debuff is ideally avoidable? It's commendable that the options are there, of course, but in the same way that it's commendable for the person who just stabbed you to have a first aid kit on hand. You don't earn a get out of jail free card by exploding my dick, then saying, but the anti-dick exploder is right here, and then in a quiet voice saying on the other side of the map in a hidden room in the locked box, guarded by killing you guy. So what we're seeing here is that there's some sort of curve, because pretty much everything else in the game I totally adored. It's one of the best games I played last year. I had a huge amount of fun with it. It's exciting to play. The world just keeps on going. It's hard, it's thrilling, it's expansive. There's a sex joke in here somewhere. One of the things that most stuck out to me, and I mentioned this before, was the NPC quest lines. This has the potential to spoil a little bit, so I won't mention any specifics, and any characters appearing on screen are totally coincidental, I promise. But I was so relieved that this game eschewed the almost clandestine Souls-like every NPC must suffer immense tragedy rule that I talked about earlier. Ironically, it made me care more about the world, since I felt like I was helping people I cared about whose fates weren't set in stone. It felt like I was actually an agent of potentially positive change, which is, that's unique. Where so many Souls-likes emphasize your disempowerment and unimportance in the scale of far broader machinations, Silksong, by playing the hero angle a little more straight, by having characters endure instead of expire, and also by having Hornet be a character in her own right, made me care about the world so much more than Hollow Knight's dusty, neglected, ammonite fossil-fueled kingdom. This was a living place with nice people I cared about wanting to save, with bells everywhere, and bells are cooler than ammonite fossils. The more some NPC questlines progressed, the longer they went without dying, the more invested in their survival I became. I know, revolutionary take, I like it when the nice characters don't die. But it's something I feel like people overlook in these kinds of games. Obviously there's a bleak tone they're going for when they choose to have characters die off, but it's nice to have a world that feels like it's worth saving. It's why one of my more divisive opinions, brace yourselves, is that I like Breath of the Wild more than Elden Ring. It's just a nicer place to be in. Killing everyone off loses its effectiveness when you know any nice person you meet is going to be insane or dead come the endgame, if not sooner. It's become formulaic in a way I didn't appreciate. One character in particular in Silksong seemed to scream, "I will die in exactly 3 plot beats," and yet they survived to the end. And I would have been mad if they had died, and I'm so glad Team Cherry decided not just to have them survive, but to give them an arc that ended in growth, not decay. Ironically, despite its difficulty, it feels like a much kinder game, and a much more pleasant experience tonally than its predecessor. It also just controls phenomenally. The moves and upgrades are remarkably restrained while still very enjoyable to use, and there's still a lot of skill required to smoothly get through the world. The zones are memorable and more varied than its predecessor. The fights are a real sweet spot of difficulty, so I never felt too strong to have a satisfying challenge, save perhaps 1 or 2 of them. Beastfly. It's a masterfully made game. I can see why it took them 7 years. Maybe Update people on your progress a little more frequently next time, though. If the above didn't make it clear, I really, really like Silksong. And those are the 4 traditional 2D Metroidvania-style games I played last year, and also Prime. But that got me wondering, have I played any other games this year that feature gear or ability-gated areas that require a lot of backtracking, that feature platforming and RPG elements and, all the other stuff I said before? And then, in a moment of terrible dawning comprehension, I realized I'd played significantly more than 4 Metroidvanias last year, if you stretch the definition even slightly. The genre isn't just popular in games that completely borrow the mold. The tenets of Metroidvania sprawl through the video game landscape like the roots of some big, awful tree, very much like how everything is secretly a roguelite. It's not a lake, it's an ocean. I had lost... is a video game by Finnish game developer Remedy Entertainment, famous for Max Payne and Alan Wake previously, and now also quite famous for attempting to hop onto the co-op multiplayer frenzy by throwing Firebreak into the mix in the same way one might capitalize on a sinking ship by drilling a hole into the lifeboat they themselves are in. And they're a long-time favorite developer of mine. I can only dream of having the confidence to come out onto a big game event stage with this much pomp and circumstance just to proudly announce that my game was going to come in a box. And with their recent announcement of Control's sequel, Resonant, I thought it was high time that I go and actually finish the previous game. I also started playing through Alan Wake 2, even though I'm bad with horror, so I imagine you must all be very proud of me. I'm sure I'll die playing Resident Evil 9. It took me a moment to come to grips with it, but yes, Remedy's Control is in fact absolutely a Metroidvania. I mean, it's a lot of things. It's a third-person shooter, it's a thriller, it's a dark comedy, it's Courtney Hope's bizarre adventure, but it is also very much a Metroidvania. It was around the time I unlocked the ability to levitate and hovered my way up to previously inaccessible areas in a place I'd already been to access upgrades and cool hidden spots that jump-scared me with people made of phloem that I stopped and said, "Hang on, I know what you are." A revelation that both sparked my desire to make this video and reinvigorated my interest in the game itself. In one moment, it flashed from a relatively linear third-person shooter with enemies that go like pts when you shoot them, into a game about trudging around a funky map trying to find all the hidden spots to get upgrades, including one that gated off an entire area that I didn't find until after I'd finished the base game entirely. That also does continue to have enemies that go like pts when you shoot them. And it really does go to show how prolific and important a cultural touchstone Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night still are to this day, even if I'd argue that Super Metroid is by far the more significant inspiration of the style that its contemporary, which I suppose is why it gets first billing, otherwise we'd be over here calling everything Castle Troids instead. I will say of Control, the upgrades you have to go flying around for like a Courtney Hope-shaped missile are often underwhelming. Save the major traversal upgrades, the majority of which are handed out piecemeal via main story progression, most manifest as weapon or power modifications. These incredible rewards provide ever so slight variations to how your weapons and powers function, like making your grenade launcher fire 0.05 seconds faster, or making your sniper rifle zoom imperceptibly farther, or making your basic jump play the Super Mario Bros. Bloop sound effect. And since I used the pistol and shotgun combo for 90% of the game and spent even more time than that throwing rocks at people like the innovative, bold para-utilitarian that I am, the vast majority were, like the game's insistence that Finland is a very exciting and interesting place, completely pointless. My inventory filled up with useless chaff I didn't even realize I was picking up so quickly that the difference between a substantial weapon or power upgrade and an insignificant one was mostly just in how much equally useless currency they'd turn into when I mulched them. Runaway inflation has gone mad in the Bureau of Control. So if the rewards are often disappointing, what's the point in exploring all over the place? Well, that's where I come in. See, I'm screwed up. I'm twisted. I'm the type who likes to 100% things if it's feasibly achievable. Now, I didn't do that with Control. But the point is that I could have. I find exploring big maps to find all the secrets enjoyable. I'm one of those journey rather than the destination types. So it makes sense that I would get so much enjoyment out of this type of game. I'm a big proponent of the things that you find are less important than the way that you find them style game design, which is also why I love Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom so much too. Not that those games are Metroidvanias, of course. I mean, you do get abilities that let you go back and access secret areas in the first zones. Oh my god. Wait, did I just say god? No, don't. Oh boy. So my intention with this video setting out well, it was to give you something to watch whilst we wait for the copyright strike to blow over mostly, but it also was to highlight just how profound an influence this style of game has had on not just games that look like it, but game design in general. I imagine that goes without saying, and I'm sure some people will disagree with my inclusion of Control in here, but my point is more to show just how significant the fingerprints of this type of game are, stretching as they do all the way through the industry. Even FromSoft's oeuvre, Dark Souls 1 especially, have a very Metroidvania-y feel to them, even if they don't quite qualify under the banner. A Metroidvania light, you might say. I'm sorry, I thought it would be funny if I referenced them one more time. I'm so sorry. It's a terribly entertaining style of game that plays well to the core feeling of discovery and joy video games can inspire in you as someone who's playing them, and that feeling of truly going on an adventure and disappearing into the unknown is something that few other kinds of games can instill in me. It's a profoundly powerful way to build a game, and I think that's why it, in all its forms, has persevered to this day, and repeatedly finds new life in spaces both AAA and truly indie. I once got into a small argument with a friend around the time of Bloodborne's release, wherein he insisted that Souls games were basically the modern 3D iteration of what Castlevania was pulling off between the weapon animation priority and the difficulty and the exploration. We were talking more about Classicvania here, of course. I disagreed at first, but the more I thought about it, tossing about in a sleepless, nightmarish fugue in bed, the more I realized that they had a point. That kind of free-form, zone-based, relatively open but still linear exploration with enemies that weren't just chaff, culminating in a tough boss fight, feels very Classicvania. And that really did come to the fore in a lot of these games. I think it's less that Souls-likes crib from the cheat sheet and more like every game does to one degree or another. I said before it was technically accurate to call Samus Metroid, but in a very real sense one could feasibly call every game Metroid as well and be correct in at least some capacity. I don't mean to suggest that video games were nothing until Super Metroid came along. Hell, Super Metroid isn't even the earliest example of a game in this style that we would later name after it. I would argue the original Legend of Zelda has it beat in that regard if you excuse the lack of platforming, and I'm sure we could go even further back, that Dizzy games on the Commodore 64 with their platforming and inventory puzzles could be seen as a reasonable early incarnation of the style, as could King's Quest or even Zork if you really stripped it down. In a sense, Metroidvanias are basically just a mashup of an action game and an adventure game, and all of a sudden I understand why we call half the games in existence action-adventures. It's almost starting to sound less like Metroidvania is a term that has any basis in fact at all, and really, any game that involves using a thing to open a thing that you couldn't open before and had to come back to could be classified as one. And hey, maybe you're right. Maybe it is a silly, far too broad descriptor. Maybe this whole video was pointless. I mean, I'm just some guy. I don't dictate that kind of thing. I just like finding cool stuff behind funny doors that require silly keys.